Okay, hello. Right, my name is Ricardo Sueiras. I work for AWS, and the last kind of 18 months I've been using AI coding assistants. Did anyone come to my session yesterday? A few? Okay, cool. Oh, I've got a few echoes. I'll try and stay over here. So no live coding today, unfortunately, just slides, where I'm going to share with you what I've learnt over the last 18 months, good and bad. So yesterday was all the good stuff. Today I'll share maybe some of the sharp edges you need to be aware of. But before I start, I want to basically introduce, for those people who maybe aren't familiar with what AI coding assistants are, just a very quick primer on what AI coding assistants do and where they come from. So developers have always built tools, right? We've used tools, we create tools, and when I think back over time, right, and how the industry has changed, from the early days of punch cards all the way through to assembly language, which is when I started kind of writing software with my Commodore 64. Any Commodore 64 people here? Yes, you're my people. Okay, and now then kind of to higher level languages like C and Python, that kind of thing. But what we've seen developers do is actually create these new kind of innovations that help them be more effectively productive, let them kind of create more code. But developers haven't always just relied on the tooling they've created, right? They also have relied on other systems to get information. So back in the early days before the internet, we had bulletin boards with your modems. The internet came along, and then we had sites like Stack Overflow, which were very keen to remind us that we were always wrong, right? For any of you that have dared to post an answer, which I have, and it's scary. And then in 2018, we had the Transformer paper that led to kind of ChatGPT, right? And it kind of led to this kind of new way of actually, from a kind of way you can use, maybe I should move back, where you can actually use these tools to actually generate code, kind of like the next evolution. And of course, one of the things that we learn, okay, and have learned over the last kind of year or so of using these tools is that now we're always right, okay? So we've gone from being always wrong to now absolutely right, which is my favorite phrase so far. And so the way I like to kind of describe AI coding assistants is they are this kind of GUI layer on top of a foundation model. And that GUI layer is optimized for developer activities. And they come in lots of flavors, lots of shapes and sizes. So that's kind of like a very quick overview for those people who aren't familiar with what AI coding assistants are. That is what they do. So I'm going to talk about now what I've seen over the last kind of 18 months, 2 years of actually how these tools in the hands of developers has kind of changed and reimagined what we do. And there's been 3 kind of main patterns I've seen. The first one is around how it's enabled developers to explore. And kind of the first one really is around how it's allowed us to start quickly, reducing the friction of starting. Sorry, this is really, I'm not sure if we can change the gain down maybe, or is that better? Okay. Yeah, that's much better, right. So kind of like starting with a blank page IDE is actually quite problematic for many people, right? And this has actually allowed you to basically go beyond that. But I'm not a game developer, okay? Last year, as part of a game challenge, I used Gen AI tools to create a very simple arcade game, put it online, make it an interactive challenge. And I speak to lots of developers who tell me constantly that this is an area, reducing the friction to get started across, whether it's coding or data, this is something that these tools really, really help them with. Beyond exploration and creating those kind of like prototypes, it also lets you kind of learn, it helps developers learn new things all the time, right? There's this concept of kind of AI unleashed, where you are using the LLM to extract the maximum potential of the LLM and let it do something that you ordinarily wouldn't do, okay? So this is kind of exploration. And it allows you to then learn new things. So I read a blog post about negative space programming. Anyone familiar with negative space programming? No, I wasn't either. But what I was able to do is I was able to take the concepts within that blog post, take it to a project that I actually knew the code for, and ask the LM, show me how to implement negative space programming in this code. It refactored the code, and now I understand not only what negative space program is, how I can use it, but also the benefits of doing it within my code. So less but higher quality tests. And when I speak to junior developers who are just starting, they always have this fear, okay, of asking silly questions. And you probably can recognize that yourself. You're in a meeting, you want to ask a question, but you think, oh, I don't want to ask it because I don't want to sound silly. Well, these tools are great sounding boards for asking the silliest question, right? And the final pattern is around how it's really affecting the developer flow. The main one being how it's reducing context switching. Back in the day, we had a problem. We'd Alt-Tab, go to Google, browser, search for a stack trace, and before you know it, you were on social media, email, something else, and you've lost half an hour of your time. These tools allow you to stay in the IDE. You don't have to move, right? You've got a bug, the LLM will find it for you, okay? Want to do something, it will help you. Want a cheat sheet, it will give you the cheat sheet you need. It also helps developers understand code. Most developers work on existing code. Many of them don't actually know the code they're working on. So these tools, I've seen developers use them to introspect, ask questions about the code, generate documentation wasn't there, and then help them start actually working on those code bases. And I was just chatting earlier on about automation. Developers are really, really good at automating things, right? But they have this internal matrix on when they decide to automate something. But this has been turned upside down now because AI tools allow you to automate things in literally one shot. So there's now nothing that doesn't need automating. So a good example, actually, I'm going to go out here, go out of code here for a second. I have a number of GitHub repos, okay, and I want to, GitHub only keeps your data for 14 days, right? So I asked Akiro to create an application that would allow me to collect all my data, and it then produces reports of basically my clones and views, okay? Now that took about an hour to create, right? And it's a useful tool to me. And I see developers creating CLIs, tools like this every day. And as you know, it's not just me. I read about these from developers all over the world. I normally reach out to them, ask them, what did you do? What was the penny drop moment? So automation is something that from the developer flow, these tools are really, really good at doing. Interestingly, if you were to guess what is the #1 use case for AI coding assistant, you might think writing code. But according to GGX, who is the world-leading authority on developer experience and developer usage, it's actually stack trace debugging, okay? They are incredibly useful if you run into problems. However, what I do see is developers using them in an incorrect way. So last week, I created a blog post that basically shares all my knowledge on how to use these to do stack trace development. I've got a slide at the end which will allow you to download all these slides at the end if you want. So have your phones ready at the end. Now, they're also really, really good at writing code though. Now, the productivity improvement you get varies. This is a study from Stanford University at the end of last year. The tools have improved significantly, so they're going to redo this. I imagine this is going to change. But whether you're doing greenfield or brownfield, these increase the developer productivity. So that's some of the good things, right? But what about the bad things, right? Or not the bad things necessarily, but what things you need to think about. And I talked about this one yesterday. If you think these AI coding tools are going to generate secure code, think again. They do not, right? And it's quite annoying, right? Especially when you pay money for them to generate not bad code, but code that still needs to go through a security review. So whatever you're doing, when you're using these tools, make sure that you have a review of your code at some point. Okay, it's really, really important. As good as the AI tools are, they still hallucinate. And what I mean by hallucinate is they will make things up. They will create classes or methods that do not exist. They will create packages that never existed, okay? Which actually has led to this whole new world of cyber squatting, where people now are creating libraries with malware on the basis they think that an LLM is going to ask someone to use it. So you have to basically kind of create your own mechanism to verify the code, right? Now, what I do, this is my mental model, okay, is I will look at the code that's produced. I will go through at a very high level, does this code do roughly from a logic perspective what I do? Is it implementing some good practices, or rather, is it implementing bad practices? Is it hard-coded credentials, that kind of thing? And when you do this over time, you actually can get to a situation where you can review things really, really quickly. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to be confident that before you run your security review that the code looks okay. But the good news is that AWS is actually investing a lot of time and effort into this. We're using formal reasoning as a way to reduce hallucinating. So re-embed is happening at the moment in Vegas. We have been leaders in formal verification for the last 10 years. We used it to secure critical AWS services and provide guarantees of correctness of our software. We're now applying that to reduce the amount of hallucination. One of the big challenges I see with AI code generation is that they create dependency files that lock you into old versions of code or versions of libraries that have got issues, right? So beware, right? Don't trust the dependency file. Make sure that you manage that yourself. They tend to work better with small tasks, small chunks of code, rather than large pieces of code. If you've got a monolith that's got hundreds of millions of lines of code in it, no LLM is ever going to help you, right? What your job is to do is to present your code base in a way that's optimized for the LLM. And we're already beginning to see that. Yesterday I talked about Kiro. It has its own techniques of doing that. Others are emerging. And we see people writing about this all the time, okay? So this is not you. If you're trying it against your big project and you're getting really bad output, it's not you, it's not the LLM, it's just the way limitations of this work. But there are techniques you can apply that will actually help you. And we've actually seen, kind of like Stanford again, do research on this based on the size of your data, the efficacy of the tools actually decrease. Maybe perhaps one of the bigger problems is that because we're relying on the underlying LLM to generate the code for us or generate suggestions, is that we risk going into this echo chamber, right? If you are doing Python or if you're doing Java, PHP even, they're really good. But what if you were creating a new library? What if you wanted to create a new programming language? Okay, getting other developers to use it, to even be aware of it, is your number one job, right? And it's really hard if LLMs are not putting your technology, your libraries, as part of the results. So the fear is that we are kind of creating kind of a narrower set of choices, preferences almost, that these LLMs, which is important because when you're using LLMs to do things like Python and Java, they're really, really good. I don't know how good they are at doing things like Erlang, Elixir, maybe Ruby. I just don't know, right? They may be better or worse. But what we do know is that we are kind of almost ransomed to these LLMs. Now, there are ways you can get around that. You can train your own models. You can create your own customized domain models based on your language, your own even libraries you've got within your own organization. So there are ways you can get around this, but be aware of those. But it does ask the question, if you're running a proprietary software, right, does that mean now that these LLMs are effectively going to end your business because they're focused on what they can produce and it's not going to be proprietary tech? We're seeing that developer flows now are being changed, right? So the existing kind of flows and tools you use are actually needing to be updated, both because we're producing more code, but it's kind of shifting from the development phase to the review phase. We're seeing new tools or existing tools like Git lean on new features that no one's ever used before, like work trees, to create safe branches for the AIs to work on. And I mentioned this yesterday, don't ever rely on the AI coding tools to undo something that they've done, because you will go and chase your tail for the rest of the day, right? Use Git, use checkpoints if your AI tool supports them to go back. And kind of, I guess the new bottleneck is not code generation anymore. Although to be fair, I'm an open source person. Code creation was never the problem. It was pull request reviews was always the bottleneck. And we're now just seeing this across everywhere, right? Because you should never promote something to production that's created from an AI tool unless human eyes have reviewed it, right? And that is a hill I will die on, right? But there are tools now to make the reviewing process much nicer. VibeCan, it's actually not new anymore. It's at least 4 months old now. But it provides a really nice way, nice workflow, Kanban board for viewing, moving your reviews quickly across. So those are kind of the sharp edges. There's quite a few, right? But even though there are quite a few, what's happening is these tools are getting better. They're addressing a lot of the challenges, and there are techniques we can approach and use to get around them. So I'm going to talk about some of those next, okay? And these are kind of the high level, the kind of the 6 main things that you as a developer, if you want to master these tools, if you want to get good with them, you need to think about. And the first one actually is no one has ever, right, mastered a tool by using it once. And yet I see developers over and over again say, oh, I tried it, it was rubbish, so I'm not trying it anymore, right? Put your hand up if you've been in that camp. No. Oh, a few, okay, right, okay, good. Honest people, that's what I like. Now, I spent 24 years at PwC, and one of the things that I learned, okay, is the 70-20-10 rule. Anyone familiar with this? Okay, 1, okay. So this is how, as humans, we are optimized to learn things, right? 10% through training courses, 20% through community, so peers like events like this, or your internal communities. But 70% is the work we do, right? The stuff you do day in, day out. So the important thing I say is use these AI coding tools every day, because every developer works differently, and what you read out there might be a good starting point, but you need to adapt it to how you work, right? And if you do that consistently every day, you will get those moments where you think, this is really cool. I can use this. And I see this consistently. And when I see organizations adopt this kind of support of getting developers to use them every day, running challenges, that kind of thing, we see amazing benefits from that community. Okay. The next thing is around, before you kind of start rushing in to use these AI coding tools, is actually to take a moment, right? As tempting as using AI coding tools are to create code, it's very tactile. It's like the TikTok algorithm, you feel it. What we've learned, okay, is actually, if you take a step back and think about the problem, break the problem down, think about what context you need, right? You will actually get better results. So we've now kind of gone from this instant gratification that vibe coding gives us to taking a step back and thinking about the problem in more depth and then getting actually better output as a result of it. I mentioned that the kind of AI code tools aren't very good at dealing with big code bases. They're also not very good at dealing with big problems. Your job, and actually I think this is the best and most fun part of being a developer, is actually taking the problems that the business gives us and coming up with solutions. Now our job is to take that and break it down into chunks, right? Tasks that we can actually give these to the LLMs that actually they're optimized to run on. And we're seeing already open source tools that help developers do this. This is just one, but there are many others. And yesterday I showed Kiro, which also does this for you as part of spec-driven development. So aside from breaking down those problems into smaller pieces, the next one actually is build incrementally. Don't ask your AI code tool to build the world, right? Understand from put your architect's hat on. What are the building blocks you need to put first, and build iteratively from there. The idea is to kind of like try and create small changes that you can understand. Right? Again, the key, you own this code. I mentioned there was a question yesterday. You still ultimately own the code these produce. You can't blame it on the LLM. Okay, it's going to come back to you. So small changes allow you to actually understand what's going on. Probably the biggest improvement you as a developer will see in how good or bad these tools are is how good you get at either prompt engineering or context engineering. So with prompts, you need to make sure that you don't just put something vague in saying, oh, I just need to add this feature to delete in this app, right? That's too vague, right? You have to be very, very specific, right? So here's an example, right? You could try the left. It's going to give you very random responses. You need to be concrete. But as I showed yesterday, don't start with that one prompt. Use meta prompting to refine and iterate your prompts, okay? So actually, I talked about, I showed yesterday how this works. And this is kind of how, I think, in fact, pretty much the same prompt I used yesterday. And it actually will actually improve not just the prompt this one time, but it will improve as you go through daily use. You'll get better at spotting the patterns. Probably the best way of improving your prompts and your context is by providing good examples, okay? The AI coding assistants are brilliant pattern matchers. If you provide an example of how to do something, when it goes to writing code, it's going to use that. So here's some examples of stuff I'm using. So things like error handling or validation with Pydantic. I provide specific examples. When I look at the code, it's copied that, verbatim, right? So really important. It does mean that you have to spend a lot longer, okay, writing the context engineering docs. Okay, so we are, as developers, going to be spending a lot of time writing docs, which we'll come to in a second. But the use of precise language when you're writing prompts is really, really important. And I mentioned this yesterday, the early easy application requirement syntax ears. It allows us to create the requirements of prompts in a language that we can easily understand and share with stakeholders, non-technical stakeholders. But interestingly, the LLMs and the AI coding assistants actually, they like this format as well. And it's probably fair to say that LLMs are pretty dumb, okay, without context. If you expect your AI coding tool to be able to write code for your specific company or your specific standards without providing the right context, then you're going to be disappointed, right? Context is literally everything. So one of the ways, and I showed this yesterday in demo, is I like to create different personas, different characters that I use with my AI coding assistants to tailor the output based on the task or the work I'm doing. So whether I'm doing some database architecture work, or maybe I'm writing some tests, okay, I can quickly switch to these personas. And now the behavior, the output I get from that AI tool is going to be different, okay? So use that to your advantage. You have a team at your disposal now of not just you, but you plus however many of these I called them custom agents yesterday, powers, whatever you want to call them, that can help you. And actually you can combine all of these and you can run these all in parallel. You can swarm them on a problem. You can run them as a DAG as well. It's up to you to experiment to find out what works for you. Now you may be asking, okay, so you talk about context. What makes good context? Well, there's lots of different ways. This is just a few examples. I talked about data model yesterday, but if you've got a Swagger file for an API API definition, so the tool for GitHub that I showed you, if anyone's seen the GitHub Swagger document, it is like 300,000 lines big. So again, that's not great. Okay, if I give that to the LM, it's going to struggle. So what I do is I take that. I say, I want to work on one specific thing within this API. Can you just basically tell me how to extract from that large API what I need? And then from that smaller information which I've curated, I then got it to write that application, right? So these are kind of all good ways that you can actually build a context. But as I mentioned yesterday, the temptation that I see it actually in a lot of colleagues over the years is to hoard documents, put everything in. But Stanford shows us that context windows, doesn't matter how big they get, right? After 20K, the performance starts to go down. So your job is to actually really be frugal with the context you provide. Edit the documents to the bare minimum, right? Start small, grow based on the task. Have multiple context files based on the task you're creating. If you do that, you'll get much better results. Now, there are a number of kind of like issues, what we see when people don't follow good practices, okay? We get context poisoning, where effectively as part of a conversation, there'll be a mistake, an error that will appear. Because that's actually now within the context window, it will keep repeating, right? We've got context confusion, where effectively irrelevant information actually confuses and distracts the AI from what you really want. We've then got basically where we've got context clash, where two things contradict each other. And then finally, we've got the context distraction, which is actually where it goes too long and effectively it now loses part of your conversation. There are techniques though. We have, over the last, I'd say 6 months, we've kind of learned on how to deal with some of these problems. We can summarize our context at certain points. So effectively, take a moment, summarize what your current context window is, dump it to a document, and then use that as our starting point. We can actually, within our Markdown documents, we can use XML tags. Who thought XML would make a comeback, right? So you can mark out areas within your context documents, your Markdown documents, and ask it just to use those. And what I've already mentioned, you can actually try and reduce your files in the first place. So I touched upon this. If you're a company and you want to know how to roll these out within your organization, the number one thing that we've seen work is where you build your own internal communities and do a bottom-up rather than a top-down approach to rolling out AI coding assistant. So at Amazon, we have like 20,000 engineers in the Slack group. We have a internal Git repo where we share prompts, we share context documents. There are hundreds of these, right? And they're shared for everyone to look at, everyone to critique, everyone to try, and everyone to improve, right? And what that means is that in a very, very short period of time, we now have pretty much every engineer at AWS and Amazon using these tools to help them. We also see the community creating tools. So this is from AWS hero, Christian Benzele, who created this tool called prompts.dev. And it allows you to effectively save in a web page things like prompts, rules, custom agents, and then share them with people. And there's already loads in there that you can use. And then finally, we're seeing a lot of people now share at kind of community events, not maybe smaller events than this, but just local user groups saying, look, I've done this really cool thing with an AI coding assistant. So the one on the right-hand side, he shared how he was able to migrate effectively from Java 8 to Java 21, I think, right? And shared all the lessons he learned. And actually, it was really, really good, actually. I learned a lot from that session. Even someone who's been using it day in, day out is always able to learn from other people. So, how do you get to this, what I call the augmented development? What are the kind of the key skills that you are going to need to supercharge in the AI coding era? The first one, I've already mentioned it, is you are going to need to get better at reading code, right? We're doing more reviews. These tools are creating a lot more code. Your ability to be able to read and understand that code is now gone up a notch, right? You can actually use the tools to help you. So you don't have to do it by yourself, but you need to kind of start that process. The next one, okay, is actually how you take a problem and are able to distill it into smaller, more concrete tasks that are optimized for the AI coding tool. And then the final one is actually communication. Now, you can actually, so with the AI coding tools I use, they support other languages. But the key thing is that we will be writing a lot of documents, okay, context documents for context engineering. We'll be doing prompts, requirements documents. So the ability to be able to communicate in the right way, both with your stakeholders as to what needs to be done, but also in a way that the actual AI coding tool will actually be optimized to understand. It's not necessarily what is the best English or the most accurate English. It's actually what works for the machine. So ears, when you look at ears, it feels very strange to read it, but it works really, really well. So that's one example. But there are others. You can use other, I think RFC 2109, I think, is another way of formulating requirements and using certain language like stop doing this or you must do this. Certain terms, and even using uppercase, for example, and bold. And I've already mentioned that writing code is only the third use case. Debugging, stack tracing is the first, and actually refactoring code is the second largest use case. Right, okay, so time-wise, I think we're okay. 15 minutes, okay. So what's coming next? So in a very short period of time, we've gone from doing copy and paste through CHOP, chat-oriented programming, to agentic AI, which was this year. But what we realized, as a community, when I speak to developers everywhere, is that actually chat wasn't really the best place to do a lot of the work we did, and that what we actually needed to do is actually kind of try and figure out how we could structure this in something, more document-centric. And actually, this is not something new. I've had conversations yesterday and today about, does this mean waterfall is coming back? And not necessarily, but specifications, right? Specifications have been around for a while. Really, it was a time to kind of bring specifications back, in a way that was fit for the agentic AI era. But you might be thinking, what the hell is a spec, right? So there's no agreed standard. They come in lots of shapes and sizes. You probably all have seen some in your software engineering, okay? But they're really kind of like a way of trying to kind of like concretely communicate what actually needs to be built between a different set of stakeholders. And kind of so spec-driven development is kind of a shift from asking kind of the AI to kind of do specific tasks to handing kind of almost like creating a set of requirements. So we're separating the design from actually the actual build of a project. You're kind of shifting from micromanagement to kind of delegation, which might seem strange to begin with. But what really spec-driven development does, it kind of does three things. It helps us focus actually to define what we need to do, right? The requirements, and actually also create a clear set of design documents. The kind of second part is actually based on the design documents that get produced, spending time to make sure that's the right design. Okay, so again, as a developer, we're going to be spending time doing that kind of work, which actually is cool. It's quite fun, right? And then finally, once you've done that, actually handing over to an AI for implementation, for code generation. And so those are kind of the three elements of what we call spec-driven development. And when you compare it to like what I was doing yesterday with the vibe coding, right? Vibe coding, it's very ephemeral, point in time. Once the chat session goes, it goes. So it feels very transient. With spec-driven development, you have everything in a document, okay? You have this strong lineage between a business requirement, the technical design that you have decided was okay, and then the code that gets created. Now, what's interesting, okay, when I speak to developers who have been using this since July, is that it actually helps them get a stronger relationship with the code that's generated. So ownership around, again, I talked about you own the code. In the vibe kind of way, developers were a bit like, well, I don't really understand what's been created. I'm not quite sure about this. In the spec way, that kind of dynamic changes and developers feel much more comfortable with that. But I'm not saying vibe coding is bad, right? The trick is how we can get the best out of vibe coding for exploration, creating those high fidelity prototypes, moving away from PowerPoints and Figma to actually code that you can put in the hands of customers, trying out features that you might want to experiment with, and then going from that to then implementing them into production using something that's more rigorous, which is spec-driven development. And I talked about Kiro yesterday. Kiro is the first IDE that's has effectively a focus on spec-driven development. But if you're not using Kiro, that you can do spec-driven development in other ways, in other AI coding assistants. So everything I talked about so far has been about developer development in the IDE, right? So what we call the inner loop, right? So actually writing code. But the outer loop, which is actually how you deploy that, is actually catching up. And so I talked about this yesterday in my live thing. I used the CLI version to automate the process of actually packaging it up and deploying it to the cloud. Creating a custom DevOps custom agent to help me do that. So just to finish up, there are people who are very worried about AI coding assistants. There are people thinking it's the end of our profession. But my opinion is I don't think it's ever been a better time to be a developer. In the keynote yesterday, which I thought was really a good story, image recognition is being used by health professionals to reduce the time it takes to treat or identify and spot issues, which has actually led to more radiologists being hired, not less. And I see the same thing happening with software development. Simon Willison, he is an online commentator, developer. Follow him because he shares every day what he's learning about these tools. But I see what he comments is that he sees a lot of developers kind of like throwing their tools up in the air thinking, that's it, I'm quitting. But really, if you think about it, we've been here before with from the punch card to the compiler, from the compiler to the high-level languages. All that happened is we democratized development. We let more people, right, enter the profession. And that can only be a good thing, right? Especially with, what I see with new developers. When I speak to, youngsters, 11, 12, 13, or those at university, what we're seeing is that AI coding assistant is such a great way for them to actually get started writing some code. They might not understand it, right? But they're actually building things. And that actually excites them. It's really, really cool to see how that's shaping up. So our job, just to finish, our job as developers is to understand how to get the best use of these AI coding assistants and understand on the continuum which parts of a job or task is best suited to the AI coding assistant and which part should I do. And there's a really great tweet from Kent Beck. If you don't know who Kent Beck is, he's kind of the guru of development. The value of 90% of the stuff I do is gone down to zero. Who cares? Because it was boring anyway, right? But the last 10% has gone up 1,000%, right? And that's how we need to think about these tools, right? They're basically just accentuating the good things about our job, and they're going to make us more productive. And so for me, the new normal for developers is what I call the augmented developer, which is basically developers using AI coding tools. So that's kind of like to finish. I write on my blog on this site here. You can download and try Kira for free if you want. And if you really want to basically get really kind of hands-on, I've done 2 workshops, one for the IDE, one for the CLI. That really allow you to go deep into actually how this stuff works. And I share my good practices. And with that will get you the slides. There's, I think, 5 questions you have to answer. But then you'll get a PDF of all the slides and all the resources that I shared today. So thank you so much. If there's any questions, have we got time to question?